friends. Welcome back to FOGMAN Stories, where real ghost stories are shared in a simple, honest way. If this is your first time here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any future stories. And if you've been with the channel since the beginning, thank you so much for sticking around. It really means a lot. Here on FOGMAN Stories, it's not just about ghosts and fear. It's about real experiences, unexplained moments, and those strange little things that make you pause and wonder. So in this 20th video, let's continue our journey into the unknown, together, with open minds, a little courage, and a deep sense of curiosity. Story 1. Hey everyone. Welcome back to FOGMAN Stories. I hope you're all doing well. Today, we're diving into the first story of this video. And it's one that's stuck with me for years. This one isn't about flickering lights or creaky floors. It's about that strange feeling you get when something just doesn't feel right. So, sit back, relax, and let's get into it. It happened back in late September 2006. I had gone over to my friend Danny's house in a quiet neighborhood in Pinebrook, New Jersey. Now, I had known Danny since we were kids, and his house always had this vibe to it. I can't explain it, but even as a kid, I never felt fully at ease there. His family had talked about weird things happening, stuff moving, whispers at night, cold spots for no reason. I used to think they were just messing with me. But one day, something happened in that house that I've never been able to shake. I must have been around 12 when it first happened. Danny and I were goofing around in his basement. That place was like a museum, antiques everywhere, old furniture, paintings, and shelves crammed with stuff that looked like it belonged in a different century. We were poking around near the washer and dryer when we saw a pile of clothes start to shift. Not like a breeze or anything. This was more like something was under them. Danny grabbed a plastic bat that was lying nearby. He figured it was his brother messing with us. We snuck over to scare him. But when we lifted the clothes, no one was there. The second we realized it, we both bolted for the stairs. That's when it got weirder. A large, old painting that had been leaning against the wall was suddenly blocking the bottom of the stairs. Thing is, it hadn't been there before. It was big, heavy, and facing us, like someone or something had moved it just to trap us down there. We pushed it aside together, hearts pounding, and sprinted up to tell his mom. And you know what? She didn't laugh. She just nodded, kind of like she expected it. Said the house had always been a bit off. After that, I avoided going to Danny's house whenever I could. Years passed, and life moved on. Danny and I lost touch for a while, but we reconnected in our early 20s. He invited me over a few times, and I figured the creepy stuff was just kid imagination. So, I started hanging out there again. It wasn't until that September evening in 2006 that things started feeling wrong again. Danny, our friend Val, and I were chilling in his room upstairs. He'd set the whole place up to be super relaxing, mellow music. A huge fish tank bubbling in the corner. And this trippy visualizer playing on the TV. It almost felt like a spa or something. We were just talking, joking around, and the topic of ghosts came up. Danny brought up the basement story. He even mentioned the painting blocking the stairs. But weirdly enough, I didn't remember that part. I remembered the clothes moving, the fear, but not the painting. It was like my brain had filed it away somewhere dark. Anyway, As we were sitting there, I started to feel off. Not scared exactly, but like the room was closing in. The light from the tank seemed dimmer. The colors on the screen blurred together. I felt like I was sinking. Like my body was still there but my mind was floating backward. It's hard to describe. It was like that moment right before you faint. Your head gets fuzzy. Your heart races. And nothing feels real. I told Danny and Val that something was wrong. I couldn't concentrate. My thoughts felt jumbled, like someone else was in my head. They looked at me, worried. Danny told me to calm down. Said it might be a panic attack. He had me close my eyes and take deep breaths. I did, and that's when it got even stranger. I started seeing things, not like memories, but flashes, images of people I didn't know, emotions that weren't mine, a woman crying, a man screaming, dark corners of a room I'd never been in, and a name kept echoing in my head, Lydia. I told Danny and Val, and Danny, without missing a beat, said, "You're channeling." I laughed, but it came out shaky. "No, man, that's not what this is. I'm just sick or something." But he insisted, said he'd read about it. That sometimes, certain people are just open to whatever's out there. And this house, with all its energy, might have just triggered something in me. I didn't sleep well that night. When I got home, I kept seeing flickers out of the corner of my eye. I'd hear soft crying in the middle of the night. My phone would light up with no notifications. For a few weeks, I felt like something had attached itself to me. Eventually, it faded. Maybe I convinced myself it was all stress or my imagination. Maybe it really was something more. But one thing's for sure, I haven't stepped foot in that house again. I don't know if I was really channeling something, or if the energy of that house just messed with my head. But there was something in there. And sometimes, we open doors without realizing it, doors that are better left closed. Thanks for listening to this story. If you enjoyed it, make sure to subscribe to FOGMAN Stories and hit that bell so you won't miss what's coming next. See you in the next one, if you dare. Story 2. Hi everyone. Let's dive into our first story. This one is close to the heart, about love, loss, and a sign from the other side that's impossible to ignore. If you've ever wondered whether someone who's passed on can still reach out to us, well, this might just answer your question. My name is Linda, and this story took place in 2003. During a time when I least expected my whole world to shift. My husband, Mark, and I had been married for almost 40 years. We weren't just husband and wife, we were best friends. Soulmates, I guess you'd say. We shared everything, meals, travels, laughs, worries. Nothing felt off limits. Even death wasn't a scary topic for us. We'd often wonder where we go after we leave this life. Not in a sad way. Just curious. Like two people wondering what's behind the curtain of a long-running play. On January 4th, we were driving home from a short getaway. As usual, we were talking non-stop. I can't even remember half of what we said. It was like background music to our lives. But somehow, that night, our talk drifted toward what happens after death. I'd lost 5 family members in the last year. So maybe that brought it up. I remember one of us, maybe it was me, saying, "If one of us goes first, let's promise to find a way to contact the other. Just a sign, something clear." We both laughed, but we meant it. It wasn't spooky or silly. It was just us. 9 days later, he was gone. We were avid RV travelers. The open road was our playground. And everywhere we went, we collected souvenir spoons. I know that sounds quaint, but it became a big part of our lives. We had racks of them lining the living room, each one a memory of some place. Sometime we'd shared. He'd always say, "No spoon goes up unless we've stood on the soil of that place ourselves." We had just come back from a trip that fall, crisscrossing the Midwest, stopping in little towns and parks. We picked up more spoons on that trip than any other, 21 in total. We were also planning something big, our 40th wedding anniversary in Australia and New Zealand. We had booked everything down to the last detail. National parks, cozy B&Bs, and even a special dinner in Melbourne. Mark was looking forward to the trip more than any other. January 6th started off like any normal day. I was packing. Mark had run errands. We decided to take our dog Daisy out for her usual walk. Mark seemed a bit more tired than normal, but he still cracked jokes. Teased me like always. Halfway through the walk, he said he needed to rest. He sat down under a tree while I told him I'd go ahead and get the car. Daisy and I walked ahead. When I looked back, I saw him walking toward the car. I remember thinking, why? I've got the keys. Why not wait? The next time I looked, he was on the ground. I ran back fast. A couple had already stopped to help. He was still conscious, just weak. I asked if he was in pain. He shook his head. We helped him into the car. He thanked the couple, smiled faintly, and then, less than a minute later, he stopped breathing. Just like that. It was silent, peaceful, no panic, no pain. He was just gone. The doctors said it was likely a heart attack. Some said it might have been a stroke. Didn't matter. I knew he was gone. And nothing was going to bring him back. I agreed to donate his corneas. He'd wanted that. He believed in helping others. The next few days were a haze. My children flew in. The grandkids came and hugged me tight. Everyone tried to stay strong. But there's no manual for that kind of loss. Our house felt too quiet. His slippers were still by the door. His toothbrush sat beside mine. I couldn't move anything. Saturday morning came. The day of his memorial. I had family over early. My brother and I were sitting at the kitchen table, sharing memories, laughing through our tears. Others were in the living room. Then we heard a sound. A sharp metallic clink. Someone called out, "Linda." Something fell. I walked into the living room and froze. A spoon had fallen from the top rack. Now, these weren't flimsy little hooks. You had to twist the spoon just right to get it off. They'd been up there for decades. Not once had one fallen. The spoon on the ground was from Tombstone, Arizona, one of our earliest trips. A place we both loved. I picked it up. My hands were shaking. I could almost hear him saying, "Hey, remember that wild ghost tour in Tombstone? You jumped when the lights flickered." Just as I turned to say something, someone whispered, "Look. The spoon next to it is swinging." Sure enough, it was. I leaned closer. It was labeled, Australia. I nearly dropped the Tombstone spoon. We'd never been to Australia. That trip was supposed to happen the following week. No one knew where that Australia spoon had come from. It wasn't on the rack before. It wasn't in our last batch. No one admitted to buying it. No sticker. No tag. Just a perfectly polished spoon. I stood there, holding one spoon, staring at the other swinging gently. It was like someone had nudged it. I didn't need words. I knew it was him. "I'm okay," he was saying. "I made it. I kept our promise. I sat down and cried like I hadn't cried all week. Not out of pain, but out of something else, relief, peace, connection. Over the years, little things kept happening. His favorite radio station playing when I started the car. Finding a note in a jacket pocket I hadn't worn in ages. But nothing ever came close to that moment with the spoons. People try to explain it away. Say it was coincidence. Say someone must have dropped that spoon earlier. But I don't buy it. I was there. I know what I felt. And if love can stretch across time, I believe it can stretch across worlds. So maybe this story sounds simple. A spoon fell. A memory stirred. But to me, it was everything. Some folks feel a breeze and think it's just the wind. Some see shadows and blame tired eyes. But sometimes, it's something more. A whisper. A promise kept. Maybe you've felt it too. Thanks for listening to my story. If it meant something to you, maybe share it. Maybe subscribe to the channel. I've got more stories like this, real ones. From people just like you and me. Take care of your heart. It remembers everything, especially love. Story 3. Hi everyone. Thanks for stopping by. Today, I want to tell y'all a story that still gives me chills when I think about it. It's something that really happened to me a few years back. And no matter how much time passes, I still remember every detail like it just happened yesterday. So, let's get into it. Me and my dad were going through a rough patch. Things hadn't been easy for either of us. So we moved in with my grandparents for a while in a little town called Timberdale. Tucked away somewhere in rural Kentucky. Their place was old, like real old. Creaky floors. Long narrow hallways, and those kind of old wooden cabinets that feel like they hold secrets from generations ago. Now, I'd stayed at Grandma and Grandpa's place a lot when I was younger. And yeah, it was a little spooky. But I never thought much of it. But this time, things were different, way different. It all started one night. I was just laying on the couch, painting the tips of my nails with this light pink polish I liked. It was late, and everyone else was asleep. The next morning, I woke up and went to check my nails, and right there, on the polish of my index finger, was the name, Ava, scratched into it. Not written with a pen. Scratched, like someone had carved it in with a tiny blade. Now, I didn't do it. No one else had even been near me. My dad was asleep in the other room. And I had gone straight to bed after finishing my nails. It freaked me out bad. But I tried to shake it off. Told myself maybe it was just a weird scratch that happened in my sleep. I didn't even tell my dad. He doesn't believe in ghosts or anything like that. But that wasn't the end of it. Not even close. A few nights later, I was sitting in the living room again, watching TV. It was late, probably past midnight, and everyone else was in bed. Suddenly, I heard this loud rumbling sound, like thunder rolling right down the hallway. At first I thought maybe it was a storm. But when I muted the TV and listened, there was nothing. No rain, no wind. Just silence. Then the rocking chair in the corner of the room started moving. Y'all, I swear on everything. That chair started rocking back and forth like someone was sitting in it. Slow and steady. I didn't move. I couldn't. My whole body froze. I just sat there staring at it until it stopped on its own. Still, I didn't say nothing. Not to my dad, anyway. But I did call my mom and told her what happened. She's the only one who believes me about this stuff. Always has. Things kept happening. It was always late at night. Always when I was alone. One time I got up to go get a drink and saw her. Ava. A full-body apparition. She was standing right outside the living room. Wearing this long, flowing orange gown with white lace around the edges. She wasn't see-through or anything like that. She looked solid, like a real person. But I knew she wasn't. She didn't say anything. Just stood there looking at me with this calm, sad expression. And then, just like that, she was gone. After that night, I started noticing this mist. It wasn't like fog or smoke. More like a dark shadow that floated behind me whenever I walked through the hallway. I'd catch it out of the corner of my eye. Turn around, and it'd be gone. But I knew it was there. I could feel it. One of the scariest nights was when I was in the kitchen getting a snack. Everyone else was asleep. House was dark and quiet. Then I heard it, my name, but not just called out regular. It was drawn out, whispered real slow. C-A-A-A-Airy. It came from the far end of the house. Like someone was standing down the hallway. The voice was soft but had this weird echo to it. Like it didn't belong in this world. I dropped the bag of chips I was holding and just stood there. Heart pounding. I wanted to call out to my dad. But something told me not to. Like if I acknowledged it, it would get worse. After that, I started sleeping with the lights on. I didn't care if it made me look childish. I just needed to feel safe. Then there was the camera thing. I had this little digital camera I used to take selfies and stuff. One afternoon, I was just lying on my bed, taking pictures for fun. Later, when I went to look through them, I noticed something in one of the shots. Right next to me. I mean right next to me. There was a blurry shape. A figure. It wasn't like motion blur. It had a head, shoulders, and what looked like that same orange gown I saw on Ava. I checked every photo I had on that memory card. Every single one had some kind of smudge or shadow on it. Even the ones I took outside. I started feeling cold spots around the house. Like, I'd be walking through the hallway and suddenly feel a chill on just one side of my body. Or I'd be sitting in the kitchen and feel like someone was standing behind me. Breathing on my neck. The worst was when she got close. Me and Dad were the only ones home that day. He was in his room, all the way at the other end of the house. I was in the living room, just scrolling through my phone. Out of the corner of my eye, I kept seeing someone next to me. Not just nearby, like right next to my face. I'd turn my head fast, but there was no one there. It kept happening over and over. Finally, I got up and walked through the house. Checked every room. Dad was still in his room with the door shut. But Ava? She kept getting close. Too close. Like she was trying to see what I was doing. Or maybe let me know she was watching. Now, I don't think she wants to hurt me. I never got that feeling. But that don't mean it ain't scary. Having something around you all the time. Following you. Whispering your name. Showing up in pictures. That's the kind of thing that sticks with you. Even now, years later, when I visit my grandparents' place, I still feel her. Not as strong as back then. But it's like a part of her is still there. Waiting. So what do I think about all this? Well, I believe some spirits just don't move on. Maybe Ava had something happen to her in that house. Maybe she's just lonely. Or maybe she sees something in me that reminds her of herself. All I know is, what happened was real. And if you ever find yourself in an old house, feeling like someone's watching you, don't ignore it. Trust your gut. Thanks for listening to my story. If you enjoyed it, make sure to like the video. Subscribe to the channel, And leave a comment if you've ever experienced something like this. Until next time, y'all take care and stay safe. See ya. Story 4. Hey everyone. Before we dive into the story, let me just say this. Some stories leave a mark on you. They stick with you through the years. Not because they're flashy or full of drama, but because they're real. And sometimes, the real ones are the scariest. So, buckle up. This is one of those stories. And I lived through it. Let me take y'all back to when I was around 14 years old. My little sister, Lucy, was 8 at the time. It was late autumn, one of those chilly evenings where the sun dips early, and the cold settles in like it means to stay. Our parents had taken us to our Aunt Darlene's place way out in the sticks of Nebraska. We were there to throw her a surprise birthday party. The adults were inside cooking, decorating, and laughing over stories that made no sense to us kids. So naturally, Lucy and I got bored. Now, Aunt Darlene lived at the edge of town, right where the paved road turns into gravel and then slowly into nothing. There weren't many houses around, and the ones that were there looked like they hadn't been lived in for years. Lucy tugged on my sleeve and said she wanted to get some fresh air. So I figured, why not? It was still early in the evening, even though it felt like midnight already. We bundled up, stepped outside, and started walking down the gravel road. Our breath made little clouds in front of our faces. The wind carried this strange stillness, like the trees were holding their breath. We weren't scared, not at first, just curious. We walked maybe half a mile, joking about school and making up silly songs, when suddenly we heard it, kids laughing. Faint, like it was carried on the wind. But it was clear as day. Lucy stopped dead in her tracks. Did you hear that? I nodded. Yeah, sounded like kids. We looked around. Nothing. No houses nearby. No lights. Just fields and some trees. There was no way other kids were out there. It was cold, and nobody lived close enough. We stood there for a second, trying to listen, but it stopped, so we shrugged it off and kept walking. Maybe a few minutes later, I tripped hard over something and went down, scraping my hand on the gravel. Lucy gasped and bent down next to me. What the heck did you trip on? We looked down, and that's when we saw it. A railroad track. Now, here's the thing. We hadn't seen any tracks when we walked that way. None. And yet here they were, stretching out in both directions like they'd always been there. But I swear to you, they weren't. Lucy started crying. I want to go home. I don't like this. I tried to keep it together. It's okay, Lucy. Let's just go back. Come on. But the problem was, I had no idea where we were. We turned around to go back, but the road behind us looked unfamiliar. The trees felt closer. The path looked wrong, like we were somewhere else entirely. But I couldn't let Lucy know that. I held her hand and walked like I knew where I was going. Then, out of nowhere, 2 kids stepped out from the trees. A boy and a girl. Both maybe around Lucy's age. Maybe a bit older. They looked off, pale, like they'd been out in the cold too long. Their clothes were old-fashioned, like something from the 50s or 60s. And their eyes? Empty. Not like evil or anything. Just tired. The girl spoke first. Are you lost? I nodded, not even thinking about how weird it was. Yeah, we were walking and must have taken a wrong turn. Can you help us find the main road? They both nodded. The boy said, follow us. We walked behind them, and I held Lucy's hand so tight I thought I might break it. She didn't say a word, just looked at them with wide, watery eyes. The kids led us down a narrow trail through the trees, and after what felt like 10 minutes, we saw lights. It was Aunt Darlene's house. I almost cried. We were back. I turned to the kids. "Do you want to come in? We have cake and hot chocolate." But they just stood there, staring. Then the boy shook his head. "We can't." Before I could say anything else, they turned and walked back into the trees. I ran inside with Lucy, calling out for Mom. Everyone was still partying like nothing happened. I pulled Mom to the door. "Come see." They helped us get back. We looked outside. No one. We searched. Nothing. Aunt Darlene noticed the commotion and came over. I told her what happened. Her face went white. "Did they say their names?" "Yeah," I said. "Sarah and Jack." She sat down like her legs gave out. Then she told us the story. Years ago, a school bus broke down right on the tracks not far from here. The door jammed, and they couldn't get out in time. A train came, and it hit the bus. 17 people died, mostly kids. Sarah and Jack were among them. Ever since, people say they see children near the tracks. Some say they push cars off the tracks if you park there. They try to help, just like they used to help each other. I didn't sleep that night. Neither did Lucy. The next morning, we packed up and got ready to leave. As we drove away, I noticed the names on 2 nearby streets, Sarah Avenue and Jack Drive. I never forgot them. I call them angels. You know, I used to think ghost stories were just something people told for fun. But after that night, I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, some souls don't rest because they have one last job to do. Sarah and Jack didn't scare us. They saved us. And if that doesn't make them angels, I don't know what does. Thanks for listening, friends. If you felt something from this story, maybe a chill down your spine or a warm feeling in your chest, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more true ghost stories. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one. Story 5. Hey everyone. Now let's get right into the story. This one is based on a real experience, and it takes us back to an old building with a dark past and some unexplained events that'll make you think twice about being alone at night. So grab a blanket, turn down the lights, and here we go. This all happened back when I was about 12 or 13. My dad used to work the night shift at this old veterans building in a small town in Illinois. It was called the Camden Veterans Hall, but everyone just called it the hall. My dad was the janitor, and he worked late hours, usually cleaning after events or getting things ready for the next day. Most nights, he worked alone, but sometimes, especially on weekends or school breaks, he'd let me come along to keep him company. One night, my friend Donnie and I went with him. Donnie was my best friend since 2nd grade, always down for whatever mischief we could find. We brought some snacks, our little flashlight keychains, and figured we'd just hang out while my dad did his thing. The hall had this room we called the Blue Room. I think it used to be some kind of lounge or bar. There were still tables and chairs set up, and the walls were painted this faded blue color. In the back of that room was a small door that led to the liquor storage closet. It was always locked, but that night, for whatever reason, it wasn't. We were just being silly kids, exploring and pretending we were ghost hunters. I remember I walked over to the liquor closet door, And just for fun, I gave it a little knock, 3 quick taps. Then, almost right away, there was a knock back. But it wasn't the same pattern. Mine was quick. The knock that came back was slow, fast. I froze. My hand was still hovering by the door. I turned to Donnie, and she looked back at me with wide eyes. Her mouth was slightly open, and her face had gone pale. She didn't say anything, but I could tell she heard it too, and she was freaked out. We both bolted. No words, no hesitation. We just ran out of the blue room as fast as we could. The hallway outside was dimly lit, and we barely made it out when Donnie screamed. Something had grabbed her leg. She stumbled, almost falling flat on her face. But she yanked her leg free and kept running. We ducked into the room across the hall, which was like a small office, and slammed the door behind us. We were breathing hard, looking at each other like, what just happened? Donnie pulled up her pant leg, and I swear, her knee was red and splotchy, like someone had gripped it hard. We sat there for a good 10 minutes before daring to peek out the door again. Nothing was in the hallway. No signs of anyone. The building was locked up. We knew nobody else was in there but us and my dad. From that night on, neither of us ever went back into the blue room alone again. In fact, we avoided it altogether unless there were a bunch of people around. A few weeks later, we decided to go back, me, Donnie, and my sister Carla. We weren't looking for trouble, but deep down, we were hoping something would happen again. Just to prove we weren't crazy, I guess. We hung out in the main hall where they used to play bingo. It was this big, echoey space with metal chairs stacked high against the walls. We were just chatting and eating chips when we heard it, this loud, screeching noise, like metal scraping across the floor. We all went quiet. I stood up, looked at Donnie and Carla, and we knew, time to investigate. We followed the noise down the main hallway, past the bathrooms and the kitchen, until we got to the blue room. We peered inside, and sure enough, there was a chair dolly, one of those carts they use to move big stacks of chairs, sitting right in the middle of the dance floor. And behind it, long, jagged scrape marks across the floor. I walked in and gave the dolly a push. Maybe about a foot. The sound it made, identical to what we'd heard. That spooked us, but we stayed. Part of us wanted to believe there was some explanation. Maybe it rolled by itself? Maybe someone left it unstable? But the thing was, it had been all the way against the wall earlier. We'd walked past that room when we first arrived. That dolly wasn't there before. Later that night, the three of us were downstairs in the basement hallway, goofing around near the copy machine. Carla had found a stack of old flyers and was trying to photocopy her hand like they do in movies. We were laughing and not paying much attention when my dad came stomping down the stairs. He looked confused. "You guys have been down here the whole time?" he asked. We nodded. He looked even more puzzled. "Then who's been flushing the toilets upstairs?" We all just stared at him. My dad swore up and down that while we were in the basement, he heard someone, multiple times, running around upstairs in the bathroom, flushing the toilets, even giggling. That night, he closed up early. Curious, I started looking into the history of the Camden Veterans Hall. Turns out, during World War II, it had been used as a makeshift hospital for wounded soldiers. Dozens of men were treated, and some died, within those very walls. That explained a lot, or maybe it just made everything creepier. Since then, I've heard more stories. Friends who've worked events there talk about cold spots, flickering lights, or hearing footsteps when the place is empty. Even my dad had a few more strange things happen, though he never liked to talk about them much. All I know is, something's still lingering in that building. Something that doesn't like being disturbed. Thanks for sticking with me through this story. Whether you believe in ghosts or not, some places just have a vibe you can't ignore. And trust me, once you hear a knock that answers back, you never forget it. If you liked this story, make sure to subscribe for more true paranormal encounters. I'll be sharing more soon. Take care, and don't go knocking on random doors, just in case. Story 6. Hi everyone. Let's jump into our first story of the day. This is a true and personal tale, quiet and eerie in its own way, that still lingers in my mind. Even years after it all happened. It's about the strange way some people just don't leave, even after they've passed on. I never thought I'd be the one telling a ghost story. I'm not the kind of person who jumps at shadows or thinks every creak in the floorboards means something. But what happened after my ex-husband died? Well, let's just say it made me question everything I thought I knew about life and what comes after. My ex, Mark, let's call him that, was not the easiest man to be around. Toward the end of his life, he'd become angry, bitter, and honestly, mentally unwell. We'd been divorced for 5 years. And he'd dated other women, one of them seriously, but he never truly let me go. In his eyes, I was always still his wife. Like I was something he owned. It was a twisted kind of obsession. The kind that bounced between trying to pull me back into his world and trying to emotionally wreck me when I didn't comply. But here's the thing. Anytime something real happened to him, like a health scare or something going wrong with his animals or computer, he would suddenly forget all the resentment and call me. Just like that, like nothing ever happened, just the sound of his voice on the other end of the phone. Desperate for help or comfort. And for the kids' sake. I kept things civil. I dealt with it the best I could, accepting that I'd probably never truly understand him. He passed away suddenly. He'd gone to the hospital after feeling chest pains, told the nurses he was fine, and checked himself out. 2 hours later, at just 47 years old, he was gone. He died right there on the floor of his living room, with our oldest child, Ben, there with him. 2 days after his death, I went to his house by myself to pick up old photos. Legal papers, anything that belonged to me or us from when we were together. I ended up staying there for nearly 2 hours, bagging up his clothes, sorting through that old file cabinet we once shared. And you know what? The whole time, I felt comfortable, safe, even, which surprised me. I thought maybe it would feel creepy, especially since he just died there. But it didn't. It was almost like his anger had died with him. I felt like I was allowed to be there, like he wanted me to take care of his things, that he was at peace with it. I went back a few more times, sometimes with the kids, sometimes alone. I never felt that same peacefulness again, but I wasn't scared either. Still, part of me always wondered if he was watching. Now, this is where things started to get weird. A few weeks after his death, my current husband, Jake, and I went back to Mark's house. Jake needed to grab the lawnmower that had been left in the shed. Now, Mark couldn't stand Jake when he was alive. Hated him with a passion, and I knew that. So from the moment we pulled into the driveway, I had this pit in my stomach. I didn't want Jake in that house. Not because I thought he'd mess anything up, but out of some strange sense of respect. Or maybe fear. But I didn't say anything out loud because, well, I didn't want Jake to roll his eyes and call me silly. As soon as we stepped inside, the discomfort amped up. I felt unwelcome, like I was being watched, judged. When Jake picked up one of Mark's old jackets to move it off the table, I swear I felt a wave of heat rush over me. My chest got tight, my head buzzed. I wanted nothing more than to get him out of that house. But I stayed quiet. We were packing up some canned food Mark had left for the kids, SpaghettiOs, tuna, things like that. When something strange started happening, I started flinching. I felt like something was falling on me. Like invisible things were dropping down from the top of the cabinets or the refrigerator. I'd duck, even though nothing was there. Jake thought I was losing it. And honestly, I thought I was too. Then came the flies. Except, there weren't any real flies. I started seeing little black dots, darting at the edge of my vision, always on the right side. They looked like those fruit flies or gnats you see in summer. Right near your ear or temple. Just at the edge of your sight. I started swatting at them. Instinctively. But there were no flies. I'd had enough. I grabbed Jake, shoved him out the door, and we drove off. I told him, straight up, that he was never coming back there again. Not with me. That feeling, whatever it was, it didn't want him there. A few days passed. I went back once more, alone. I didn't feel anything strange that time. No flies. No invisible objects falling. Just the usual sadness that comes with going through someone's things after they're gone. More than a year passed. The house sat empty, slowly deteriorating. The bank hadn't foreclosed on it yet. But it was coming. Life moved on. We got ready for our second Christmas without Mark. That's when I saw it again. I was in my kitchen, cooking dinner. Mark's favorite hobby when he was alive, and suddenly, there it was. That little black dot, buzzing at the edge of my vision. Right side again. I knew, deep down, he was back, somehow. I even said it out loud. He's here. The next day, I drove past his house. Sure enough, a big, for sale, sign out front and a full dumpster in the driveway. The bank had finally sent people to clean it out and get it ready to sell. Over the next few weeks, the black dots, his fruit fly ghosts, as I started calling them, would show up now and then. Always when I was cooking. Always near my right side. And strangely enough, they didn't bother me anymore. They were more like a presence. A check-in. Like he was saying hi. I even joked about it with Jake. Mark's stealing my measuring spoons again. I'd say when I couldn't find them. Jake would laugh and say, well, at least he's not throwing things. Eventually, I talked to a psychic friend of mine. She's always been a little out there. But she's the kind of person you talk to when weird stuff happens. I told her about the fruit fly dots. The feeling. The timing. She didn't even flinch. She said, he's not alone. He's brought others with him. Family. This sort of thing happens a lot around the holidays. That gave me pause. I mean, it's one thing to have your dead ex-husband hanging around. But now he's bringing his mom too. His uncle? His grumpy cousin Larry? That part, I didn't like so much. One night, about a month after all this started, I was home alone. The kids were asleep. Jake was working the night shift. I was reading in bed when I felt the mattress dip behind me. Like someone had just sat at the foot of the bed. I froze. Now, Seeing little black specks out of the corner of my eye? Fine. Feeling someone physically sit on the bed? Nope. That crossed a line. I sat up and spoke out loud. Clear and firm. I don't mind you being here. You want to keep an eye on the kids? That's fine. But you can't show yourself like that. No more sitting on beds. No more touching things. You're not allowed to make yourself known like that. And just like that, it stopped. I didn't see another black dot until the next Christmas. Just one. In the kitchen. I was making his favorite casserole. It felt more like a, hey, than anything else. Like he was passing through. And you know what? I was okay with that. So, here's what I think. I believe some people have such a strong hold on the world. On their people. That they don't let go easily. Mark had a lot of unfinished business. And maybe he stuck around to finish it. Maybe he just missed his kids. Maybe he just wanted to make sure I didn't mess up the casserole. Whatever the case, I don't think he ever meant harm. Just presence. But I still can't explain those fruit fly specks. I've looked around, asked others, but no one seems to have heard of something like that. A ghost. Showing up as a little black dot. Maybe it was just the way he could show himself, quiet. Sneaky. Always just out of reach. Anyway, thanks for listening to my story. If you've ever had something like this happen, or if your ghost showed up as a cloud of gnats or something weird, let me know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more real ghost stories. See you in the next one. Hand waving. Story 7. Hey everyone. Thanks for being here with me. This is a real experience. And I gotta say, it changed how I look at the world. So, let's get into it. I was around 12 when this happened. Back then, I didn't believe in ghosts or spirits or any of that spooky stuff. I thought it was just stories folks told to scare each other around campfires. But after what happened at my best friend's old house, I started to think maybe there's more out there than what we can see. My best friend at the time, let's call her Riley, had just moved out of this tiny 2-story house in a quiet neighborhood called Maple Hollow. The house was kind of old, with creaky floors and chipped paint on the porch railing. But what made it really creepy was the story everyone in town seemed to know. You see, years before Riley's family moved in, there was this elderly lady who lived in the attic. She used a wheelchair and barely left the room. One night, they say, she passed away up there, all alone. Some folks say she was waiting for someone who never came. Anyway, Riley's family moved out, and the house stood empty for a while. One afternoon, me and a couple of our friends, Jade and Maddie, decided to go check it out. We thought it'd be fun. Maybe even a little spooky. It was one of those dumb ideas kids come up with. You know, none of us really expected anything weird to happen. So we walked over to the place. The sun was still up. And from the outside, everything looked normal. But the second we stepped inside, something felt off. It was way too quiet. Not just regular quiet, like thick, heavy quiet that makes you feel like you shouldn't be there. We made our way through the living room, which was still furnished like someone had just stepped out for groceries. Lights were on, but no one was home. We figured maybe the power hadn't been shut off yet. The furniture was dusty, but the air felt cold, like the place hadn't been touched in a while. I was in the middle, with Jade ahead of me and Maddie behind. We headed toward the attic stairs. And just as I placed my foot on the first step, I heard something. A voice. Not loud, but clear. It said something like, "Wait." I froze. My stomach dropped. I turned to Maddie, and her eyes were wide. She heard it too. We looked at Jade, and she'd stopped walking. None of us said anything. But we kept going, moving slowly up the stairs. It creaked under our weight, and every step felt heavier than the last. The attic was where Riley's room used to be, right where the old lady had died. When we got up there, the room was dim, even though the window was wide open. There was only one thing in the middle of the floor, a small wooden box. It looked really out of place, like someone had just left it there recently. I nudged Jade. "Go check it out," I whispered. She rolled her eyes but walked over. I thought I'd scare her for fun, so I yelled, "Boo," right as she reached the box. She jumped and screamed, and I laughed, but that laughter didn't last long. Suddenly, the lights in the hallway downstairs started flickering, on, off, on again. We hadn't touched any switches, and there weren't even any lights upstairs. Just natural light from the window. Then we heard footsteps, not ours, heavy ones, like someone pacing downstairs. We looked at each other and bolted. But as we turned to run down the stairs, something strange happened. All three of us tripped at the same exact time. It wasn't like one person fell and made the others fall. It was like something yanked our feet out from under us. We hit the stairs hard, bam, and slid halfway down, screaming all the way. When we finally got up and rushed to the front door, we found it closed, but we'd left it open. I was sure of it. We didn't stop to think. We just flung it open and ran all the way down the street. We never went back to that house. Not even once. I still think about that voice sometimes. Who, or what, told us to wait? And what would have happened if we did? I'm not saying I became a ghost expert or anything after that. But I stopped laughing at stories people told, because now I had one of my own. So yeah, that's my story. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more true spooky stories like this one. See y'all in the next tale. Story 8. Hi everyone. Thanks for being here with me tonight. Now let's start the first story. Okay? This one is a true story that happened to someone when they were just a kid. And honestly, it gave me the chills just hearing it. So grab your blanket, turn down the lights, and let's get into it. My name's Tyler, and I'm 14 now. But this happened back when I was about 10 years old, on Christmas Eve. It was one of those chilly nights where the snow fell gently, and the whole neighborhood seemed to go quiet, like the world was holding its breath. The living room was still glowing faintly with colorful lights from the Christmas tree, and the faint sound of holiday music was drifting from the radio downstairs. That night started out just like any other. My little sister, Ella, was 6 years old then. She came tiptoeing into my room looking a little freaked out. She clutched her stuffed polar bear tight and looked up at me with those big brown eyes. "Can I sleep with you tonight?" she whispered. Now, here's the weird thing. Ella was terrified of Santa. Most kids love the guy. But she thought the idea of a stranger sneaking into the house at night, even to leave presents, was super creepy. She used to ask Mom every year if we could just leave the gifts outside and lock the door. So, of course, I said she could sleep in my bed. I got up and went downstairs to let Mom and her boyfriend, Steve, know. Steve was flipping through TV channels, and Mom was folding laundry. I said goodnight, grabbed a glass of water, and made my way back upstairs. Ella was already tucked under the blankets, facing the wall. I climbed in next to her, got cozy, and drifted off in no time. But later that night, something woke me up. It wasn't a sound exactly, just this weird, heavy feeling, like the air in the room had changed. I opened my eyes and immediately froze. There was a girl kneeling on my nightstand. She looked about my age, maybe a little older. Her hands were clasped like she was praying, and her head was bowed. She didn't move, didn't speak, just sat there like she belonged. At first, I thought maybe I was dreaming, but I felt wide awake. Just to be sure, I sat up, grabbed my cup of water, and splashed some on my face. Still there, she had long, thin blonde hair, pale skin that almost glowed in the dim light, and big blue eyes. She wore a green dress that looked old-fashioned, like something from a Christmas play, and little green shoes with tiny bells on them. Strangely enough, the bells didn't make a single sound. I glanced at Ella, hoping she'd wake up too. I whispered her name, nudged her arm, even shook her shoulder a bit. Nothing. She was out cold. So I turned back to the girl and whispered, "Who are you?" She didn't answer, didn't even flinch, just kept her eyes closed and her hands clasped. I pulled the covers over my head. My heart was pounding like crazy. I didn't know what to do. I stayed like that for what felt like forever. Then I heard footsteps, light, careful steps on the wooden floor. I peeked out from under the blanket. The girl was walking away, heading toward the door, but then she stopped. She turned her head slowly and looked right at me. Her eyes locked with mine, and for a moment, it felt like time just stopped. The air went ice cold, and every hair on my body stood up. Then, just like that, she vanished. No sound, no flash of light, just gone. The next morning, I ran down the stairs and spilled everything to Mom and Steve. I described the girl in detail, what she looked like, how she acted, the way she disappeared. They didn't believe me. They smiled politely and said it must have been a dream. But then something strange happened a few days later. Steve came into the kitchen one morning, looking like he hadn't slept at all. He told us he'd woken up around 3 in the morning and saw a little girl walking down the hallway. He thought it was Ella at first, but when he checked her room, she was fast asleep. He said the girl had blonde hair and a green dress. His face was pale, and he kept looking over his shoulder like he expected her to show up again. That was the first time I'd ever seen him rattled. From then on, he left the hallway light on every night. I started doing some digging, asked around the neighborhood, looked through old newspapers at the library, even asked a couple of the older neighbors. One woman, Mrs. Donnelly, told me there used to be a little girl who lived in our house back in the 1950s. She died right before Christmas. Some kind of freak accident with the fireplace. I couldn't find much else. But the dates matched. The age matched. Even the description of her favorite Christmas dress, green with white trim, matched. After that, things started happening more often. Lights would flicker in the hallway. We'd hear soft footsteps when no one was up. The bells on Ella's Christmas stocking would jingle at night, even when the heat was off and the windows were closed. One night, I left out a small candy cane on the windowsill, just as a sort of offering. I don't know why. The next morning, it was gone. No trace, no crumbs, no sticky spot where it might have melted. Another time, I heard whispering in the middle of the night. Couldn't make out the words, but it sounded like a little girl talking softly to herself. It came from the hallway. When I peeked out, I saw a green shadow at the end of the hall, right by the Christmas tree. Then it was gone. But she never did anything bad. She never hurt anyone. It was like she just wanted to be seen, to be remembered. Now, every Christmas Eve, I light a small candle and leave a piece of candy on the windowsill. Just in case she still visits. Just in case she still needs someone to pray with. I don't know what she was. A ghost? A memory stuck in time? Something else entirely? All I know is that I saw her. And Steve did too. So what do you think? Was she real? Or was it just the cold and the quiet playing tricks on us? Thanks for sticking around and listening to this story. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment below. And if anything weird has ever happened to you around the holidays, I'd love to hear it. See you in the next one. Story 9. Hello everyone. This is a true story. And it's one that's been with me ever since I was a little kid. It's about the house where I grew up, a place I still love dearly. Even though some very strange things have happened there. So, let's get started, shall we? My name's Callie, and the house I'm talking about belonged to my grandparents. It was located in a small, quiet town called Willow Creek. My mom and I lived there until I was about 11 years old. From the outside, the house looked like something out of a storybook. Big front porch, tall oak trees, a swing in the backyard. It was peaceful, but inside, well, inside, it held secrets. When I was around 7 years old, I started getting this weird feeling about my own room. It just didn't feel right. The air felt heavy, and sometimes, I felt like someone was watching me even when I was alone. So, for a while, I started sleeping in my mom's room. One night, I woke up in the middle of the night. I wasn't dreaming. My eyes just popped open. And I was staring at the wall beside the bed. The room was dim. Just a bit of light coming through the curtains from the porch lamp outside. I turned my head and looked around, trying to figure out why I woke up. And then I heard it. The bathroom door creaked. Now, this bathroom was right next to my mom's room. And I knew for sure, that the door had been closed when we went to bed. It always was. I felt my heart drop into my stomach. I reached over and tapped my mom on the shoulder. She wakes up easily, and the moment I told her what I heard, she was wide awake. We both got out of bed, and she led the way to the bathroom. The door wasn't just cracked open, it was wide open. I looked at her, and she looked at me. Her face went pale, but instead of freaking out, she tried to stay calm for my sake. She said something like, "It must be the wind." But we both knew that made no sense. The bathroom window had been sealed shut since before I was born. We closed the door again and went back to bed. But neither of us slept well that night. That was just the start. As time went on, little things kept happening. For instance, every time we took pictures inside the house, there were these giant orbs floating around in the images. Not just a few, dozens. At first, we thought it was dust or the camera acting up. But even brand new cameras, brand new phones, didn't make a difference. The orbs were always there. Then there was my dog, Max. He was the friendliest dog ever. But he hated the walk-in closet by the computer desk. Every time I sat there to do homework or play games, Max would sit next to me, growling low, staring at the closet door. Sometimes he'd even bark like there was someone inside. The door was always closed. But it didn't matter to him. He acted like something was there. One of the scariest things happened late one night. I had finally gotten brave enough to start sleeping in my own room again. One night, I was fast asleep and suddenly woke up. I don't know what woke me, but as I opened my eyes, I saw something. It was a boy, a young boy, standing in the corner near my closet. His figure was faint, almost like a shadow made of fog. He just stood there, looking at me, and then, and I swear this is true, he walked toward me. Slowly, like he was tired, he reached the edge of my bed, and collapsed. I scrambled backward and turned on the lamp. But there was nothing, no one, just the silence of the room. I wanted to scream, but I was frozen. I sat there for what felt like an hour, staring at the corner where I saw him. The next morning, I asked my mom if she ever saw anything strange. She didn't say much, just nodded and said, "Yeah, this house has always had a presence." Turns out, there was a reason for that. Our house had been built on land that used to be a recovery site for wounded soldiers during the Revolutionary War. It was part of the George Washington Battleground Nursery, a place where injured men were brought to heal. A lot of them didn't make it. I started digging more into it when I got older. My grandma had an old book of local history that talked about tents being set up right where our house stood. There were even reports of unmarked graves in the area. Some nights, my grandma would mention odd things too, like hearing footsteps in the attic, or her music box starting to play on its own. One time, she found the kitchen cabinet doors all swung open in the morning, even though she swore she closed them all the night before. Still, despite everything, I never stopped loving that house. I still go back to visit my grandparents, and I still sleep in the same room. The creepy feeling never completely went away, but now it feels familiar. Almost like the spirits there just want to be seen. Maybe they're lonely, maybe they're just stuck. Whatever it is, I don't think they mean any harm. Looking back now, I think some places just hold on to the past tighter than others. My grandparents' house in Willow Creek is one of those places. It carries memories that go way beyond any of us living there now. Some good, some not so good, but I believe every home has its story. Ours just happens to be one that whispers in the dark, creaks in the hallway, and shows itself when you least expect it. Thanks for listening, everyone. If you've ever experienced anything like this, you're not alone. And if you liked this story, don't forget to follow the channel for more true tales like this. See you in the next one. Story 10. Hello everyone. Welcome back. Tonight, we've arrived at the final story of our spooky evening. So grab your blanket, maybe dim the lights just a little, and let's get into it. This one's got a quiet kind of chill to it, not loud or showy, but the kind that settles deep and stays with you. So here we go. Hi friends, now let's begin the last story of the night. This is a true one, and it happened to someone when they were just a teenager. I changed the names and place a bit, but everything else stayed the same, and I added in a few details to make it clearer for y'all. It was a warm summer day. The kind where the air feels thick and still, like it's holding its breath. My name's Lila. I was 14 back then, and I remember that day so clearly you'd think it happened just yesterday. We lived in a small farmhouse just outside of a little town called Ridgemont. Not much ever happened there. You knew everyone, and they knew you. Our house sat back off a gravel road, with a front yard that stretched wide and open. and fields in the back where the neighbors kept goats that somehow always found their way into our yard. My parents were both working that day. Dad had the morning shift at the mill, and Mom had picked up extra hours at the diner. Before they left, Mom looked me straight in the eyes and said, "Lila, keep an eye out for the goats. Okay? You know how Mrs. Pendergrass's goats like to sneak through the fence." I nodded and told her I would. I was always good about that sort of thing. I liked feeling responsible. My oldest brother, Mason, was 16 and didn't really care about goats or anything. Really, he spent most of the day glued to the living room couch, watching reruns of old action movies. As for me, I was in my bedroom, just doing my thing. I loved reading stories online, ghost stories. Mostly, the kind that give you goosebumps but still feel safe because you know you're just reading and not actually living through it. My computer sat on a desk right by the window, and my chair had wheels on it, not one of those fancy ones. Just a little office chair with squeaky casters. I was reading this one story about a haunted farmhouse in Kentucky when suddenly, my chair jerked, actually moved. I thought maybe I had leaned too far or something, but it felt like someone yanked the back of the chair, hard enough that I nearly toppled over. "What the heck?" I muttered, whipping my head around. Nobody was there. I looked at the door, still closed. My room wasn't big, and my desk was right next to the door. So if someone had come in or left, they'd have had to brush right past me. I would have seen them. I would have felt them. But no one was there. I stood up, heart beating a little faster, and checked under the bed. Nothing. Opened the closet, empty except for a few clothes and my winter boots. I even checked behind the door, just in case Mason was trying to mess with me. But he was still out in the living room, volume up loud, completely oblivious. I sat back down, shook it off, told myself it was maybe just a weird slip, or I'd leaned back without realizing. My heart settled. I went back to reading. A few minutes passed. The story was getting good. Something about a girl hearing whispers from the walls. And that's when I felt it. A hard, sharp tug on my hair. Not a gentle pull, not a little prank. This one hurt. Ow! I yelled, spinning around. Again, nothing. No one. My hair was still swaying slightly, like someone had just let go. I touched the spot and winced. There was no reason for it to ache like that unless someone had actually grabbed a handful and yanked. I stood up, backed away from the desk. "Mason," I shouted. He didn't answer. I peeked out my door and yelled louder. "Mason." He finally called back. "What?" "The goats are in the yard again." I lied. I didn't want to tell him about the hair. No way he'd believe it. He grumbled but eventually got up, grabbed Dad's old pellet gun, and stomped outside. Sure enough, a couple of those goats had squeezed their way through the broken part of the fence again, nibbling at Mom's rose bushes. He shot near them to scare them off, and they scattered back toward their pasture. But while he was out there, I stayed at the door, watching. Something about my room felt off. It wasn't cold, it wasn't dark, but it felt like something was still in there. A presence, not threatening, not exactly, just there. Like when someone walks in a room and you can feel them behind you, even if they're not making a sound. That feeling never left. After that day, nothing quite as scary happened. No more hair pulling. No chairs yanked. But sometimes, late at night, I'd feel the edge of my bed sink slightly, like someone sat down. Other times, I'd catch movement out of the corner of my eye. Just a flicker. I never told my parents. And Mason? He wouldn't have believed me anyway. But I never forgot that feeling. And you know what's strange? Even with everything, I didn't feel unsafe. It was like whatever was in my room didn't want to hurt me. Just wanted me to know it was there. Sometimes, I wonder if it's still there. Watching, waiting. Some stories don't end with a big scare or a final jump. Some just leave a little whisper behind. Like this one. Thanks for listening tonight, friends. If this story gave you a chill, or maybe reminded you of something strange from your own life, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Leave a like, and share your own story in the comments. I'd love to hear it. And that's it for now. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and always keep an eye on the shadows. Good night, and see you in the next video. Don't forget to subscribe to FOGMAN Stories. Bye bye.